Great. Well, I think we'll have a slightly different take on topics today. So thanks very much for letting us be part of this event. So this presentation will not share specific mechanisms for teaching technology, but rather seek to place the practice of teaching with and through technology in the post-secondary environment in a larger political landscape of capitalist form of life. So to give you a context of who we are, I am the head of digital scholarship services here at U of A Library. And at the time of our pitch to this event, Kate was a digital scholarship resident librarian working with me in the center. The Digital Scholarship Center is a fairly new academic center operating out of the University of Alberta Library, dedicated to furthering research and learning through digital technologies. We host events, deliver non-credit workshops, and teach anyone at the University of Alberta on how to use technology for scholarly purposes. This includes media production, 3D printing, 3D scanning and modeling, text analysis, and data visualization, among others. I often preach to those around me that our goal is to be recognized as a research methods expert within the university community, fully aware of all the costs, challenges, and risks that this entails. One assumption operating in this talk is that digital technology is under-theorized in the 21st century. Robert Hassan argues that there is an impasse or poverty of theory in terms of our understanding of the technology-driven trajectory of 21st century capitalism. While Devogeni and Mitya have also positioned the contemporary philosophy of the digital in the history of 19th century positivism. Essentially, as computing develops out of the military-industrial complex, it is adopted by industry and society in an instrumentalized and ethics-free manner rather than a humanistic one. Our working definition of digital literacy departs from the American Library Associations, whose focus is on requiring cognitive and technical skills, toward an umbrella concept developed by Avaram and Eshet. Their conceptualization incorporates socio-emotional facets and nonlinear organization of digital information for use and creation in the 21st century. For example, drawing on the work of digital humanists, we often teach the database versus narrative paradigm for scholarly knowledge on the web. More broadly, however, my personal understanding of literacy has always been a theory of power, and my interest in literacies, whether they be print, information, data, or digital, have always been about ways to give away power to allow learners to participate in and shape the world around them. In other words, I'm not interested in stopping at inclusion. As workers in informal learning organizations, librarians are often asked to teach my students this digital software in a single drop-in session. The so-called come as you are approach to teaching would not be tolerated in language instruction or economics, but it is routine in the area of technology. You might call this unscaffolded, throwing the learner in the ocean approach to instruction. One wouldn't ask a first grader to write a thesis on theories of change, but scholars are regularly expected to visualize this data set without any foundations in statistics, for example. The weirdo influencer of our work, pictured above, Seymour Papert, sought to create environments for children to use computing to solve problems, have fun, and socialize all at once. And if we can teach children how to program with felt blocks, why can't we teach university students to think ethically with and through digital technologies? Doing so, of course, requires a commitment to an ethical stance and a positive conception of freedom. Furthermore, in relation to the broader theme of the Festival of Teaching and Learning, we reject the harm reduction approach to the concepts of equity, diversity, and inclusion in the way that they are currently positioned by the Academy, in that we understand them to be mechanisms by which neoliberalism frames relations of power without significantly changing the conditions in which those relations are produced and reproduced. As much as we seek to design safe, welcoming spaces conducive to learning, we are nevertheless bound by institutional structures which prevent us from compensating graduate students for teaching workshops, from making community partners not pay for parking, or by not having enough software licenses for group learning installed on our workstations. Because the entire purpose of the Contemporary Library is to manage access to private property relations rather than eliminate the need for them. To me, these are core elements of EDI-J work, or JEDI, as it's now being called, that are beyond my capacity to change, yet I, as an individual worker of the university, am regularly asked what I'm doing about them.
Okay, so another idea that we think is worth considering within the context of digital literacy education is anti-oppressive pedagogy, which, although not widely implemented within formal sites of education, has been part of the discourse since Freire's Pedagogy of the Oppressed, and more recently, Comicchio's towards a theory of anti-oppressive education. It is important to remember that technology is never neutral, never merely a tool, but built within oppressive systems and thus contains those same assumptions about the world. And so within this context, we think it is important to consider how might we develop critical perspectives and alternative visions of technology in higher education. As Migueles, Valcaraz et al. Argue, it is not sufficient to ask what technologies afford educators and students to do, but also how technologies may frustrate aims to enact anti-oppressive education and how educators can work around those frustrations. The added challenge here is that although we theorize about the benefits of enacting anti-oppressive education and other theories within the DSC, to paraphrase bell hooks, the possession of a concept or theory does not bring that process or practice into being. We are, of course, limited to the technologies that we have on hand due to a finite amount of funding, and the affordances of these technologies limit us as educators in other ways. Similarly, that come-as-you-are approach to digital literacy and the one-shot style of teaching that we as librarians are often expected to do constrain the way in which we are able to meaningfully engage with these theories in our teaching, but still, we try. So that's it for the theory part. For the second half of the presentation, I'm going to briefly share some examples of the kinds of digital literacy pedagogy that the DSC staff have engaged in over the past year and a half. So we employ a makerspace certification model, our version of micro-credentialing, where learners need to pass basic safety and technology concept skills, as well as commit to upholding a code of conduct. Our series of workshops related to larger skill sets are examples of our micro-curriculum building, and specifically research communications and digital scholarship 101, which cover topics like computational thinking, spatial analysis, metadata, and visualization. As we work with adult learners primarily, the hack and yak model theorized by digital humanists is also helpful in introducing concepts and then allowing for just messing around with software and/or hardware. The Wikipedian in residence activities are, in our view, indicative of a pure learning model where the events not only feature practitioners, but also commit to participants creating knowledge collectively. There are no experts per se, as all learners are deemed equal in their goals and process. And so this is just some of the credit courses that we've been involved in some way. You'll notice that our intervention so far has tended to be at the methods stage and primarily in the humanities and social sciences. So in future, we do seek more breadth in disciplinary intervention. And I'd like to expand a bit on one particular teaching collaboration that happened early in 2020 with a section of English 103 as an example of what interactive and discussion-based digital literacy instruction can look like. The goals for this session were to introduce the students to the DSC and the technologies and resources, as well as to talk about the often invisible labor and processes within libraries. So the first thing we did was have the students go on a self-guided scavenger hunt of sorts around the DSC space. I placed cards beside most of the technology, letting the students know what they were called, and then the students were then asked to find out what these things could be used for by using their phones. I didn't guide the tour of this space, but rather had all of the doors open and the lights on, and the students had time to just wander around together and help each other figure things out. We then came back together in the classroom space to discuss what everyone had learned about, what they found interesting, what technologies they might want to try. My hope was that by giving students this opportunity for self-discovery and peer sharing, they would not only learn about the DSC, but also feel that it was a space in which they were welcome and where their ideas were valued and listened to, even if they had no specific technical expertise. The second half of the class was all about the labor and processes that make up libraries. But in order to talk about that, I also needed to talk about the deliberate historical feminization of library workers, as well as the general lack of racial and cultural diversity within libraries. Through this discussion, I asked students to think critically about the impact that historically having a workforce of primarily white women would have on both the building of library collections and also on the status of library labor, particularly within the academy. This was a small attempt at building some class consciousness with undergraduates who may not have had as much time yet to internalize the politics of knowledge production, and also my way of trying to humanize the large and often very confusing internal structure of libraries by explaining a little bit of what's going on behind the scenes that makes it possible for a student to find a journal article PDF when searching the library website. As with any new endeavor, the DSC faced a number of challenges and projects, of course, that didn't go as planned. In order to be effective, DSC staff needed to be not only methods experts, but also to have a level of fluency with the technology. And building that expertise takes time. So this meant that we would sometimes disappoint users who came to us expecting technical support and expertise, only to find that we were in fact learning right alongside them. And as you can imagine, the cost of technology is of course quite high. And so the choices had to be made about which technologies would be available, which then limits what we had available both for our own teaching and for users to engage with. There are also non-budgetary constraints, such as very restrictive digital rights management licenses for things such as digital versions of video games that prevented us from being able to meaningfully provide student access to video games as requested by instructors for a game lending pilot that we were really quite excited about. Digital video games are, of course, distributed within a capitalist mode of production that sees them as a commodity to be bought and used by only one individual. And so educational models are, for the most part, legally impossible at this moment. Nevertheless, within the context of a technology learning space, some strategies have been taken to forestall the capitalist relations, even if we are aware we cannot exit out of them completely. So these include no charge for workshops, supplies, infrastructure, space, or consultations with our team. Our code of conduct, which is upheld and maintained and was crucial in the formative months of the center's operations. We do our best to ensure that we have supplies for everyone, such as kits and consumables, although this can sometimes be a tough sell to university administration. And we do try to encourage fun within the space, both for ourselves and for our users. And having a combination of interest-based inquiry and no grades makes positioning the joy of learning a little bit easier for us. But we do admit that at this point, these kinds of projects make up a small percentage of the kind of work that we see.
So what's next for us? What are some steps that we could take? We would like to expand into new areas such as robotics, physical computing, and sewable electronics. Technology practices like these are indicative of interdisciplinary knowledge that combines computational thinking and human-centered ethics. However, they resist this assumption into the scholarly machine in that they require supplies, space, time, and are not necessarily appropriate for all contexts. Similarly, we could be exploring more subversive usage of tech, such as this work by Natris Gaskins, to test the limits of racial bias in algorithmic computer vision in surveillance technologies, the use of which is growing in universities. And finally, I'm also currently working through syllabi for 3 non-credit mini courses on topics including, and this is what I'm calling them, critical use of technology in research, intermediate digital literacy, and a philosophy of technology. My goal with these is to complement the deep dives into specific tools and methods with a bit of theorization and historical context for the techniques about which we are asked. In our quest to deliver the what and the how, I believe the why is also crucial. So thank you very much for having us. This is where you can reach me and the center. And if you're interested, we have some readings as well. So thank you.